Okay, we're live. We're back. Sorry for that, guys. Just one of those days, one of those things. We'll just roll with it and we will just move on and do what we do. So I am so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. This is the fourth installment of our Autistics in the Workforce series. We are so thrilled to have you joining us today. We were talking all about recruitment, career, how do we interview, how do we have this conversation as neurodivergent humans, as part of intersectional populations, not only neurodivergent, but hey, we could be all different colors and cultures and backgrounds and genders and all kinds of stuff. And how do we navigate this? My guests today are Marc and Giulia Crawley from Diversita out of the UK, and Miss Irene Nexica, who's a technical career coach. And guys, we are so excited to be having this conversation with you today. And I am simply going to say, I'm Carol Jean Whittington, founder and principal of Mind Your Autistic Brain, leader of the NeuroDistinct workforce movement. This month is Autistics in the Workforce campaign, and this is all about us because employment and underemployment in our community is tragic. And we are so talented. We are so gifted. We are so skilled. And the world needs to be able to support and create environments. And we talked about that yesterday in corporate cultures that are there to support our zone of genius where we can show up and be part of the working world. Guys, welcome to the show. Irene, I would love for you to introduce yourself and share with everybody your big why. Why do you do what you do and how do you do it? Oh, you're on mute.
Today's that day, isn't it? Yeah, everybody. Hey, I'm Irene. I'm based out of the United States. I am a technical recruiter, and I'm also a career coach who focuses on folks with identities that generally are not well served by the way interviewing is often set up and the way workplaces are often set up. And I do this work because social inclusion is really important to me across a variety of identity vectors.
Oh, that is fantastic. I love that. Marc and Giulia, introduce yourselves. Tell us what you do, why you do it, and what this is for you. What is your passion and purpose?
Marc.
Sure.
Yeah, you
yes, okay. So yeah, my name's Marc. Crawley. Basically, we're based in Kent, in the UK, which anyone knows it's in the southeast part of the UK. So essentially, I've been in tech recruitment for around 17 years. Worked at sort of senior leadership levels in my previous roles, but I think ultimately, if it's about the why really, and why we set up Diversita back in April, the key passion point really is our autistic son Thomas, who's 15 now as well. I think as he gets near the end of his schooling, it's a little bit more complicated about what he does next, etc. And I think that combined with certainly within technical IT recruitment, I could start to see more and more prohibitive and onerous recruitment processes, particularly from large size organizations. And without trying to sound too idealistic, we was very, very keen to maybe do something we're a bit more passionate about and something that we believe contribute to, like you mentioned, some horrendous employment stats, particularly with autistic individuals. So that's our why, really. That's certainly my why anyway. So yeah.
Yes, I mean, I don't come from the corporate world. I have spent the last 15 years caring for Thomas. Within that time, I have actually worked in schools as a special needs teaching assistant. And my why is definitely my son and his friends and his school colleagues that have come before him and those that will come after him. The word neurodivergent is not said in school. Neurodiversity is not said in school. These children are going to school, doing their thing, coming home, not really knowing what will come next. And the help really isn't there. I mean, the schools do an amazing job in raising our children and getting them where they need to be for that time. And then it's very much off you go. And we're starting to find that the off you go, there is not a lot of choice out there, and there's not a lot of information, and there is not a lot of anything. It's terrifying. It's terrifying for them. It's terrifying for the parents. And that's my why. I don't want him to have to go out into the world and not know what he's doing and not know where to look for help. And I don't want him or any of his friends or any school leaver to do that. So that is definitely my why.
That is a powerful why. And I love that we have this well-rounded group of folks joining us here today, because, you know, employment really is from when we start looking in our early young adulthood, all the way through our lifespan. And, you know, for me, I'm late identified. My CV looks like probably 10 different people because I've had so many different careers, but I've excelled in every one of them, be it real estate appraisal, you know, probate and real estate law, hospital administration. I mean, I was an adjuster, an insurance adjuster, and catastrophe insurance. I mean, I've done a ton of things in my life. I've been, you know, a corporate trainer. I've worked in nonprofits as a trainer. I mean, I've led groups. I've done all of these things, and I've excelled in each one of them. But there's a lot of them, and this is pretty normal. If you look at a NeuroDistinct adult candidate who is 35 or older, we have a pretty varied resume. And that really works against us. And I know Irene's probably can talk to this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Irene. You know, from the recruiting standpoint of things, when you get folks who are like me, who are a lot older, and we've got this really varied resume, and it's like, okay, and I'm either in this industry or I'm looking to transition into another industry. It's really hard to look at that and go, well, how do I present this so it's not working against me?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do I build a skills-based resume? Do I look at what skill set I have in those past things and then just apply it to that position? I mean, how do I start navigating this? Because it's like, if somebody looked at my full complete resume, they would be like, whoa, you're not dependable and you just have got way too much going on. I don't even know what to do with you. And I've heard that, and that's okay. But it's like within the format and the structure of what hiring managers are looking for now, what companies are looking to do. I mean, they want innovation, they want creativity, but how do we package ourselves so that we are really representing what we have without having those gaps that said, okay, well, this job doesn't really apply to this, so then I've got this time gap. What do we do, Irene?
Well, you know, I think that's a really great question. And I feel like there's a lot of answers I could give. And I would say a lot of it has to do with companies are really different. And so some companies will look at a resume like yours and say, oh my God, we love the, you know, like say, I don't know, like say you're applying to be like a sales rep or something. Wow, you know, they can communicate with all these different communities. They are clearly flexible and are able to like configure their skills in different ways, judging by the, so part of it is how the company views you, and that you kind of can't control, because some companies will look at the resume and say mess, and some will say gem. I think the main thing to think about as a job seeker is that your resume is your marketing document. It's not your work history document. So if you're applying for a role and say you took a break in the middle and you were a circus clown, you just need to put one line on the resume to account for that period of time. And who knows, maybe circus clown has some skills that are transferable to the kind of job you're applying for, but you really need to customize your resume to every job, not just the kind of job, but the company. So really research the company. What are they interested in? Focus on that in your resume. And then everything else can be one line. If it's a timeline issue, you don't want to have a huge gap. Just, you know, one or two lines to explain what you did. Even if that gap is like, hey, I took some time off and traveled the world. Hey, I took some time off and raised kids. None of that to a mature company is going to be a red flag. A lot of that will be a positive, because, you know, parenting is like the hardest job on earth practically. So companies that see those things as a red flag, especially for neurodistinct people, are likely companies you don't want to work, because they are focused on your lane, or only this profile can be good doing this job. So that's part of the equation, I think, that goes into when you are looking at a job description and trying to figure out, should I apply? How should I apply?
Oh man. Okay. So that just made me feel a whole lot better, number one. And number two, the other side of that is what I was hearing you say is you have to be really strategic. You have to really curate your application, your cover letter, your resume to each job in each company. Okay. I'm also ADHD. So the executive function on that and the spoons and all this stuff. How do we start doing that in a way that's going to like support the way that my brain works, and I'm giving myself enough opportunities, but I'm also not like running myself into the ground, into burnout? Like, what do I need to find a headhunter? Do I need to work with a career coach? How do I navigate that, Irene?
Well, I mean, I love that you brought up a career coach, because I think really for neurodiverse, neurodistinct people, have a career coach who specializes and understands not just what that means in general, but is able to kind of take the generalities and really apply it to you in particular. Because, for example, the autism profile, right? Some people are very sensitive to fluorescent lights. Some people can focus really deeply on things, but only if they're a special interest. Some people can focus deeply on whatever's in front of them, given the right circumstances. So having a coach can really be a game changer. It definitely was for me, both in terms of accepting what I can and can't do in a way that's not judgmental, because society is very judgmental. It's that whole lanes idea, right? You know, how can you be an X if you never did X? Well, I've done this that looks similar to me. And some people will say, great. And some people say, oh, no, that's not the same. So I think career coaching is really important. I think there's a lot of free information out there focused on neurodiversity to kind of help you understand how to frame neurodiversity, or even how to understand yourself, because part of what I think is really important in the interview process is, if you need accommodations, asking for them and being able to be really specific about what accommodations you would ask for. The company may not be prepared to offer those to you, but if you know and can lead with that, that's a great first step, versus a company applying like a one size fits all. Oh, this person is autistic, so we're going to do this. Maybe that's not the actual accommodations you need. And once they've kind of countered your request with something else, you know, then it starts getting muddier the more you go back and forth. So being really clear about what you need, I think is really important. And I think, you know, just finding resources that make sense for you, understanding the job search in general, which most people don't understand. You know, most people are throwing the same resume into the pile for every job they apply for. And as a recruiter, when I look at your resume and I can't tell the link between the job description I've posted and your resume, or it's not really strong, it's hard for me to try to fill in that gap when I don't know you. I want to answer the last part of your question, because I think that's really great around like having ADHD, kind of, you know, how not to burn out on the job search. So career coaching, I think, can give you options. You can come up with them on your own. You can use free resources. There's a lot of nonprofits that coach job seekers. They may not be focused on neurodiversity, but they'll at least let you know some of the best practices of job searching in general, and you can adapt to them. But part of it is, you know, for folks with ADHD, I really encourage them, you might want to apply for 3 totally distinct jobs that you're totally qualified for, but spend 1 week applying for one kind of role, 1 week applying for the other kind of role, 1 week applying for the other kind of role. You'll probably have 3 different resumes, but they'll need very little modification as you apply to different companies, because they're focused on that role. So you're just modifying it a little for the company. You're looking at the job description, picking up on their keywords, making sure you're adding those to your resume. But you're not trying to apply for all 3 jobs simultaneously every week, because the switching, autistic people, same thing, right? The transitioning can really throw you off. And so this way you're kind of focusing on a lane. Say you're getting a lot of traction from one of those 3 very different roles you're applying for. You might decide, okay, I'm not going to apply for the other 2 for a while. I'm just going for this number 1 so that I can get a lot of interviews and you know, kind of compare apples to apples with companies. That's great. But really, understanding kind of how can I bucket things in a way that I can focus on the same thing. I'm not task switching all the time. But it's getting me closer to my goal.
That is huge. I mean, Irene, that really, wow, that's really good. And I can honestly say, you know, that FOMO, fear of missing out part of my, you know, dopamine seeking ADHD part of my brain. And then there's like the strategic bucket alignment, like consistency routine, autistic part of my brain. That makes sense to both sides. And like that relieves that needing to do it all at one time. And then at the same time, it's giving me some strategy and structure. Wow, that is amazing. Thank you for that insight. So Marc and Giulia, I know that you guys, and Irene just mentioned this, that you guys have a mentorship program that you're starting, which I think is fantastic. So share with us a little bit about the mentorship program that you have, who that's for, and how they can connect and find you guys to be a part of that.
So our mentorship program, which we've only just got off the ground, it basically aligns experts in technology fields with younger school leavers, graduate leavers that are coming through that need a little bit of extra support and help. We try to align the mentor with the mentee based on the same sort of technology that they both want to work or are working in, and if we can, with the same neurodiversity, NeuroDistinct. So that's basically what we're trying to do, just to help, just to give a little bit of extra help and support, because like I said before, there's not a lot out there that people know about. I'm sure if you start digging deeper, you'd find in this country we have access to work, which can be helpful. But for the average person that is just finishing school, finishing college, wants to work in IT, but doesn't really know if their CV is going to be good enough, whether they've even studied the right thing. A lot of the time they might have not studied the right qualification they need for a life in tech. So we try and put them together with somebody who can give them life experience and tell them what it'd be like for the recruiting process or the interview process or the application process, just to give them that boost that they need to apply for the right job and to have the confidence to interview at the right job. So, Marc, did I miss anything out?
No, I think it's a really good summary. So we realised quite early on that we were talking to some very, very experienced NeuroDistinct candidates that were very, very, very happy in their roles, but very keen to contribute to what Diversita were doing. So we spoke to a great career coach called Marc Whitmore, and he is an expert in mentoring, and he's ADHD himself as well. So he come up with a really, really straightforward 8-month program that we started working on, and it's incredible because we spoke to a lot of sixth form colleges or school leavers and alumni, etc., that were a little bit lost after leaving school, etc., but had an interest in tech. So aligning this experience and this appetite to assist as well with some people coming through it's great. When we've set up Diversita, we're not a social enterprise, but we want to have a social impact, and this is a great way, we believe, of doing this. And what's really encouraging is, and Giulia's looking after this program, is we have more mentors than mentees now. So we have more people that want to assist than we do people to help as well. So it's a great parallel focus for us as well. And we love it. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, that's fantastic. I had just seen a post that Giulia had put out about this program coming up, and I went to AutoZone here in town. And of course, I got to talking to the guy there at AutoZone, and lo and behold, he just graduated with his degree in IT. He is autistic. His son is autistic. And he's like, I'm not really sure where to start. He's, maybe in his mid to late 30s. And he's like, I've got 2 or 3 other jobs right now while I was going to school full time. I'm like, wow, man, you are definitely high speed. Somebody's going to want you. And I said, you got to go check out this mentor mentee program. I think this might just be right up your alley. Cause he was like, I've sent out a couple of resumes here locally, but I don't know, because I don't have anybody to really talk to. The school that he goes to doesn't have a really knowledgeable career coach program for neurodivergent people. So he was like, and I know that I need to find something because I'm just recognizing this in myself. He's late identified. So I love that you're doing that. If you were talking to someone who's just getting out of school or just graduating university in the tech field, because that's where you're working, and they're looking for like, well, what do I do first? Like this is like Scrum's my thing, right? and I know this is my lane. This is the lane I live in, but I don't know anybody and I don't really maybe know where to get started. I've kind of got this resume. I followed the format that they gave me in the career center, the job center. What is maybe some information for that person who's just starting? Like their resume maybe doesn't have a whole lot on it.
Mm-hmm. Certainly from our side, I mean, this is why we try and align technology, in particular with mentors and mentees, because there are some incredible courses that you can do to have sort of inch wide, mile deep skill sets in particular areas that are very, very candidate short at the moment. For example, a development language like Python at the moment is very candidate short in the UK as well. So learning around it, joining communities that talk around Python, talk around coding, and talk about their passion around these areas as well. Setting up things like GitHubs and really putting yourself out there in terms of what you can do and demonstrate. It's really, really important to understand what that community looks like at the moment as well. Educationally wise, obviously, we're not experts around that as well, but we know and what we can advise is how to be an active member of the community that you want to be part of as well. I think even more so, particularly with the way we operate with the mentors at the moment, is mentors will tell people how an IT team looks within an organisation. When you go through schooling, it's very generic, and we call it ICT here, and they talk about things in a very, very practical, theoretical way, but actually understanding all of the different roles, the different names for different roles within those organisations and how you develop. Equally so, and I think one of the most important parts of this is that the mentor can then also talk about this is the way most large organisations will interview and test you and how they will qualify you for an opportunity as well. So yeah, I could talk about it all day, right? But there's a variety of ways. But I think ultimately just being a very, very active member of the community that you're looking to join is really, really important as well.
Oh, thank you for that. Okay, so guys, let's kind of move into, we're sort of talking about, well, kind of where do we start from each end of the life spectrum here and experience spectrum. So Irene, I would really love to hear from you. Share sort of your insights on, once we've sort of gotten some clarity, maybe we're working with a career coach, we're strategizing, we're being strategic about running in this lane for this 1 week, maybe honed it down to a particular thing. What if we're coming from an intersectional background? What are some things to start looking at from that perspective, especially when we're vetting companies that we're applying to and looking for, well, is there really, they may say they're DEI and B, we talked about this yesterday. Somebody might just be checking a box. They may be putting it on their website, but in practice, it ain't happening, folks. How do we start looking at that? I mean, from that perspective of, hey, I'm one of those marginalized groups. This is me. And I'm coming up against things in the world and in the workplace and in the interview and application process that I'm not really sure how to navigate, and I'm feeling it.
Yeah, I think, gosh, I thought a lot about this coming into this discussion, and there's so much to present, and I haven't thought directly about your question. So, rein me back in if I go a little far afield. But I think for folks with multiply marginalized identities in the workplace, most of us have already experienced some form of bullying, some form of dismissal of the skill sets that we have, some form of people making assumptions about our, culture, our capabilities, whatever. And that's not exclusive to disability. Disability forms just one of those vectors. And so I think part of it is having an awareness that exists and that can happen. A lot of that just so you can take care of yourself, so that you have, I call it my personal board of directors, the people you can go to pump you up when you feel like, wow, I just had an interview and I felt like they were really, they couldn't understand how my story of persistence was a positive. They kept saying, oh, wow, it must be so hard to grow up speaking more than one language, or, oh, English wasn't your first language. Do you think you'd have trouble doing X, or something like that? So I think part of it is developing that resilience and not doing it alone is really important. I think in terms of having that identity as well, really understanding for yourself what's important to you. How do you want to be seen in the workplace? And then vetting the company through their interview process and seeing if they're capable of meeting you there. And I guess like one example I would give is asking for accommodations through the interview process. So for a lot of neurodiverse people, whether you're autistic, whether you are dyslexic, whether you're ADHD, there's a lot of supports that can help you navigate the interview process that are actually part of your right. In the US, we have this thing, the Americans with Disabilities Act. It basically is there to do its best to ensure that there's equity in the way people are treated. So if, for example, a recruiter reaches out to you and in their signature, their email signature, it tells you how you can request accommodations, that company is on the right track because they're already factoring it in. They're not waiting for you to ask about it. They're telling you they already have it and the process to get it. If they don't have that in their signature, you can obviously still request it, and then you can see how they handle it. Does the recruiter seem to know what they're doing? Does the accommodations process run smoothly? Are the accommodations they offer in line with what you need? Are they willing to talk with you about, they offer you this and you say, well, what I'd really like is, could I get the questions in advance, even if it's just an hour before the interview? And you can really kind of gauge by the response how well prepared that company is going to be to deal with you if you end up joining their workplace. And I think that's really important. And for folks who are like people of color, but don't feel like they're neurodiverse, I'm hoping if you're listening, you can kind of understand, because we do the same thing, whether or not we're neurodiverse. Am I going to be able to bring some version of my whole self to this workplace? Or am I going to be dealing with microaggressions every day? And that's really important to figure out. We cannot change workplaces. I don't believe as an interviewee, you can always give feedback on what the hiring process was like for you. It may or may not change, but you can really know, this is how I need to take care of myself. This is what I'm going to need if I'm working here, and see if they can start providing that for you at the outset of the interview process. Is that helpful? Anything you want to talk more about?
Yeah, I do. I want to kind of dive into this just a little bit, because you touched on it, from the, more advanced of us, those of us who are not just starting out and who are late identified in life, this can be really scary to disclose. And it's like, well, how do I navigate that? Number one, for me, it was understanding what that meant for me. What does it mean for me to be autistic and ADHD? Like, really? So what are my needs? What accommodations do make a difference for me? And most of those, hey, they're free. They don't cost anything. It's just a matter of having them in place and acknowledging that they exist, and then sharing that, and how that gets met. But how do we, from like in the interview process and in the job search process, like, I'm just learning this about myself. I'm not yet feeling comfortable in my own skin. I don't feel safe. There's not like that psychological safety aspect of being able to disclose, but I know I need some of these things, but I don't know what all of them are yet. How would you coach, recommend for someone like that?
Like me? I'd be happy to talk that through, because you're right. Like, feeling safe enough to disclose, sometimes you just need a job. You have a real financial pressure or some other pressure to get a job. And so you're like, I just want to do whatever is going to get me the job the soonest. And I might not want to, throw things into the mix that I'm worried about will make me seem less employable. And you don't have the luxury of vetting like, oh, I want the best company for disabled people. And so there's resources available in the US, and it's internationally available because it's online. There's a group called the Job Accommodation Network, and they're funded by our federal government here in the US. I'm just put their website in the chat there. And the Job Accommodation Network has an amazing website that's full of, like, if you have this diagnosis, or and I want to emphasize self-diagnosis, I consider just as valid as formal diagnosis. These are accommodations that might help you. And you can look through those lists and say, oh my gosh, that would have been great. Oh, this would be great. And that can help you start building your list of these are things that would help me. And then when you're entering the interview process, you don't have to lead by saying, oh, I have a disability, I need these accommodations to interview, blah, blah, blah. You can just kind of informally request them and just say, hey, you know what? I do my best work when I'm not thinking on the spot. And so I'd love to get those interview questions in advance. Would that be possible? So you can do kind of a softer, you don't even have to call it an accommodation. You can call it an adjustment or something like that. And again, see how they respond. Oh shoot, there was something else I was going to say and it's just left my mind. You can basically work with your recruiter and ask them for a preparation call. Now, preparation calls help all kinds of folks who are job applicants, because a lot of the application process for each company, it's different, but it's not because of the job itself. It's just the society, the culture of the company. So I would say to any job seeker who's interviewing, always ask your recruiter for a preparation call. In that call, you can come with questions that you want to ask. You don't have to rely on the recruiter, because some recruiters have no idea what a prep call is. And if you ask for one, they'll be like, yeah, we can talk about the interview before you do it, but I don't know what I would tell you. And so you can come prepared with questions like, hey, what topics will the interview cover? Can you give me some information about what the interviewer tends to prefer in terms of the way the story gets told? Anything like that can be really invaluable to help you get an advance peek into what to expect and to kind of guide your preparation in that way. Like I say, this works for everybody. This has been studied, and it's been shown that a preparation call increases equity for all kinds of personalities, all kinds of folks. And the best companies who are really on point with their recruiting, recruiters will have a prep call already assembled for interviewing. They'll be able to, schedule 15, 20 minutes to go over what to expect before each different round. So I think those are some different ways that you can think about how you want to talk about your disability or not, but also get the kind of help that you need that's really going to support you in showing up the best way you can in the workplace. And that's one way you can frame it in a soft way. Hey, the best way I'll be able to come to this interview is if this and this and this are in place. Could we do that? That's all you have to ask your recruiter, and then see what they respond. You might be surprised.
Oh, wow. That is just such good insight. I appreciate that so much, because, that's a big question. That's a really big question. And, on the opposite side of things, Marc and Giulia, how would you, for those people who are new, this is maybe the first or second time, they may just be taking like their internship and they're moving in or looking for their next position or their full-time first position. And for most in that age group, these guys maybe have known their identity and their neurodistinct brain knowledge for a long time. And that's a different generational perspective. So they're pretty comfortable with it for the most part. The younger adults that I talk to, they're like, yeah, this is just me. It's just part of it. I'm used to it. And in the tech field, that accommodations and those types of neurotypes are pretty common. They're more used to that conversation of our neurotype. But what are sort of some of the things that have come up for you? Like, what have you been thinking as Irene was sort of going through her list? I could see you guys like thinking over there.
The prep call is definitely a brilliant idea. It is definitely something everyone should do for every job that they're going for, to be honest. You need to know exactly what you're going into, what is needed, who the culture of the company. I think is brilliant. You can do your own research and have some sort of idea, but if you're working with a recruiter, they should definitely be able to, like Irene said, spend 15-20 minutes with you, just going through so that there are no big shocks, I think, on the day, I think is the best way to describe it. What about you, Marc?
Yeah, I think ultimately, even if you're a candidate and you're looking for a role, even if the recruiter you talk to has no understanding around neurodiversity or the concepts of adjustments or anything like that, the very, very least they can do is have an understanding of the client that they're going to apply to on your behalf as well, and really, really understanding everything around that client. And I think like Irene said, it's a good barometer of the quality of the agency or the quality of the recruiter that you're working with as well, if they can answer very, very straightforward questions around the organisation, particularly the CV review process, the application process, the interview process, all of these things that cause quite a lot of anxiety, and particularly autistic candidates as well. So it's really important that prep call, or that call relating specifically to the organisation, is very, very in-depth and very, very clear. But it's also a great opportunity for the recruiter to demonstrate their knowledge about the organisation they're working with as well. So yeah, I think it's critical. It's critical. I think with regard to, we're talking around the asking for adjustments as well. Again, this is a big drive from us at the moment to try and work with other recruitment agencies and to try and raise that conversational understanding around neurodiversity, because it's incredibly, I've worked in recruitment a long time, and it very, very rarely come up. It may have come up for disabilities a few times, but very rarely around neurodiversity as well. So again, pushing that conversation forward and prompting that conversation is really important. Even if you're just going to test, I suppose, the recruitment agency's appetite to go and do this, it's a good way to raise the subject as well. So.
I mean, sort of the typical maxim we use in recruiting, at least as a recruiter, the best places, again, will really focus on recruiting, as we are really the relationship manager between the candidate and the company. And so, with every candidate we work with, there's a chance that they will be offered a job. And we would love for them to say yes, because if we offer them a job, that means we want you to work here. So the idea is a company is putting its best foot forward throughout the entire recruiting process, so that when you get to the end, you'll be inclined to say yes. So the flip side of that is, if a company isn't treating you well through the interview process, that's typically, if that's what they consider the best way to treat prospective employees, then it's something to kind of think twice about, in terms of like, wow, when I join the company, they're not going to be wooing me anymore. They're going to feel like they got me. And if I'm not happy with the wooing, am I going to be happy with the partnership? And if that answer is no, and you have the privilege of like other offers, or you don't need to get a job right this minute, you can drop out at any point in time. You can always decline an offer. There's no need for you to take an offer that you're not comfortable with, unless you have to have this job right at this moment for some reason.
I think what's interesting, particularly in the UK, sorry,
no, go ahead.
is that organisations probably don't need to do that much to try and impress candidates at the moment, such is the state of the current interview and application process for neurodivergent candidates as well. So even just offering, or even entering into a discussion around adjustments, sometimes it is such a positive for our candidates at the moment, because that first step, a lot of big organisations just aren't taking at the moment, and it's getting better, which is fantastic as well. So in the UK, organisations don't need to do that much to actually woo, if you like, particularly early stages. So,
Irene, I love how you brought this all together and we're giving that insight and perspective, because I'll tell you, immediately what came up for me, and somebody may roll their eyes at this, but this is how my brain works. So we're just going to go with it because it's my show. And here's the thing. When I was in college and I was going through Rush for Greek sororities, and then I went through that whole Rush process, it is very much the interview process. Same things. I was told this, by girls who were older than me when they were going through the process and they were already in a sorority. They're like, look, they're not just looking at you, you're looking at them. Look around the room, see who's there. When you talk to people, do you feel a sense that they get you? You're seen, known, understood, heard, that, their values and the things that they're sharing align with who you are. And on the flip side of that, when I was then in the sorority and we are trying to put our best foot forward to attract the people that we wanted, that were a good, and I hate this word and it's used so much in recruiting, a good fit, because really we want diversity. And that was one of the things that I looked at. I was like, is there a variety of people or am I just seeing like the cookie cutter? And I was really attracted to the sorority that was really diverse. There was a lot of different things. There were a lot of different interests. People looked different, sounded different, had different interests. That to me was what I was looking for. And apparently, I guess I was what they were looking for. And on the other side of that, when I was the one sort of recruiting, I was having conversations where I was asking, hey, what's really important to you? What do you like to do in your free time? Looking at and sort of sharing who I was with them in return so that they got a better feel for the diversity in our group. And I would make sure I introduced them to someone that maybe aligned with what they were talking about, where their interests were. Mm-hmm. So to me, this is just another one of those social things because it's very social. But from that perspective, if someone hadn't explained it to me very clearly, and I think the girl who did must have been neurodivergent also, and she just recognized that I didn't get stuff like she didn't get stuff, but she figured it out. So I like how you were explaining that, because I think that's something like I know in my early career, I was so oblivious to a lot of these things. But once someone pointed them out to me and explained, hey, you aren't just like going in and it's not all on you. You're not completely, wholly, and fully responsible for this interview job process. 50% is yours, 50% is theirs. And you have to not just be interviewed, you have to interview them. Like it is also within your agency, leadership, and authority in your own life and directing your career that you're asking them some questions. And I love how you broke that down, because until someone clearly told me that, I thought it was my responsibility. It was all on me. And it was just like, do you like me or not? Am I good enough? Do I suck? In your opinion, as the hiring person. So like, what are your best tips and insights? Like, what are some things that you wish you would have known, or you hear your clients and people that you work with, like maybe they're not aware of this particular aspect of the job search process? What are some like things that people don't talk about? They just assume you fill in the blank and you know it, but we don't.
I mean, I think part of it for a candidate, again, is really knowing yourself. And if you have a formal or informally, like you're self-diagnosed as neurodivergent, really understanding, what does that mean for me? What are the things I need? What are the things that are nice for me to have? And what supports maybe don't I need that maybe other people, even with my neurotype, would need? And being able to articulate that, and then thinking of some questions. So, I talked before about kind of like not a formal disclosure, but kind of asking questions that will give you a sense of how will they support who you are. So you could say like, hey, if you're talking to the hiring manager during the interview process or someone in higher leadership, like say you're one of those folks who like ADHD, super creative, really out of the box thinker. You can see the big picture and put all these connections together. And you find in the workplace, you're frequently like building efficiencies because you can see how there's duplication but it's all the same work. So you could say like, hey, what has happened here before? Is there an example of a time that somebody suggested a new way of doing things? What happened? Like leave it super open. And you don't have to say what you prefer, right? And then let them answer. And you can ask the same question of multiple people to really get an idea, because then you won't have just one person's opinion or how that works with their team. You'll see across the company. So, if there's certain trademarks of how you work, for example, I am a kind of a creative out of the box thinker. I really struggle in an environment where they want me to stay in my lane, because I'm like, no, this other thing that you're saying isn't in my lane actually affects my job. And I need to understand how that's working at this company to do my job well. That's how I've put my job together. So then I'll ask questions, about creativity around out of the box thinking. Sometimes I'll even ask questions about introverts or introversion, because sometimes what I do to focus is turn off all my notifications, mark myself out of the office. Is this a company that's going to be open to that? Or am I supposed to answer every ping, which for me can be a super distraction to what I'm doing? So just, again, the only way I can ask those questions though is by knowing myself. Some people, a million pings and answering them, and then they can dive right back into what they're doing. Typically, I'm not that person. So I need to be sure I'm in a workplace that's going to support me in turning off all my notifications for an hour so that I can crank out some amazing work that they're going to love.
Oh, that is so good.
Yeah,
And, I posted that post that came out today, sort of highlighting our conversation today, talking about situational interview questions. Tell me about a time. And it's, that is sometimes and I hear this all the time from autistics and neurodivergents who are going through the job search process, and they're like, God, it just makes me cringe, makes my teeth hurt every time somebody asks me this question. And there's really a specific formula for how you answer this, because there's a reason that question's being asked, a particular tell me about a time question. And there was like over 2,100 hiring managers were surveyed, and they were asking for like, what are your top 10 qualities you're looking for? Like 73% of them said that they're looking for people that are self-starters. Another 73% said they're looking for people who have a really strong work ethic. I mean, the top 5 things on that list of the top 10 are some of the total zone of genius as a neurodivergent person. And I'm like, this is amazing. Yet you have this question that's really hard for our brain to answer without having a format or a structure and an understanding of the why behind the question. Because when we know why you're asking us that question, then we know exactly what data to give you and in what format. So like, there are certain questions that's like, tell me more about a time. And the reason is the recruiter is looking for how you highlight your self-starter quality.
Yeah. And I think, like you can work with a career coach, you can use free resources, really understanding how to tell an impactful short story. When I typically prep people to interview, I don't just prep them for the interview in specifics. I spend about 5 or 10 minutes on general interview best practices, because I can't assume they have them. And so I talk about, make a framework for telling a story that has a clear beginning, middle, end, highlights your accomplishments, and that you can tell it in like a minute to a minute and a half max, and then pause and ask the interviewer if they need more detail, because if they don't, move on to the next question. So part of it we can rehearse ahead of time. I can predict as a recruiter when I'm interviewing for recruiting jobs, the kinds of questions they ask. And so I just have this growing master list of topics I can talk about, questions I can answer. I don't memorize it. I just read it when I'm actively interviewing. I just read it in the morning and I read it at night before I go to bed. I take down a note of all the interview questions I'm being asked as I'm in my interview so that I can like add them to my question bank. And that lets me be really flexible and understand like, okay, I'm going into this call. I'm prepared to talk about why I get into recruiting, what I love about, those are kind of standard questions. So that I think really helps. And that anybody can do. Like most job seekers are not prepared to do that. And a lot of them fall flat in their interviews, but the ones who prep stand out. And I think that makes a huge difference. And then also as a neurodiverse person, being able to frame, like you mentioned some strengths, right? So really being able to frame what you do in terms of those strengths. The reason I was able to bring this project to fruition 3 months earlier than expected was because I can go blah, 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 blah. And then the employer really has a sense of what your strengths are. It doesn't matter if they're because you're neurodiverse or because you studied this when you were a kid or because you're major. They just want to know, do you have the skills to do the job? You know, where you got them shouldn't be an issue. And if it is, again, I would question the employer who's wanting some pedigree that they think predicts success. Most employers now are moving to what we call skills-based hiring. And that means we don't care where you got the skill. Did you teach yourself? Did you go to a fancy school? Whatever. Can you do it? This is the essentials you'll need to do this job. And I think that really helps neurodiverse people because you can say, I can do X. These are the conditions I need. No fluorescent lights. I'd like to have noise canceling headphones. I'm going to need a quiet room, blah, 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 whatever you need. Most employers would be like, oh, that's all we have to give you to like get this amazing and excellent work. No brainer.
Oh man, that is so good. That like, if you guys didn't just take a deep breath and go, okay, wow, all right, I feel like I can manage and I can navigate this now, then you just like come back, watch this again and listen to that section.
And Marc, and if I could highlight one more thing, I don't want to take up tons of the airtime, but you know, when I was preparing for this conversation, I was really thinking about who's going to be in the audience. And some of the people are probably going to be job seekers, and we've been talking a lot to that. But some of the people in the audience might be leaders, they might be hiring managers. And I really want to emphasize that a lot of accommodations, not just for neurodiverse people, but for all kinds of disabilities, really benefit tons of people. And they're low cost, they're low entry. So for example, closed captions are often really helpful for folks with auditory processing issues, which can be neurodiverse people. But they're also super helpful for people who are hard of hearing and people where English isn't their first language. So just by turning on the closed captions, for example, on a Zoom call like this, you're serving at least those three groups and making it easier for them to get the content that they need to understand what's going on in the meeting. And so this idea that like accommodations are like a special request or they're a big wall to climb over, I think really needs to be debunked. Because that's part of the stigma that you mentioned, Carol Jean, in terms of like people don't want to ask for them or people don't want to mention them. If everyone were to mention, wow, it would really help me if this were possible, could we do this? I think lots of people would be like, oh my God, that makes such a difference and I never even knew it was possible.
Oh, see, I love you. I love your brain because we're going to circle back to this because we want to talk to companies. We want to talk to leaders. We want to talk to hiring managers as part of this conversation. And if you're in this, you're listening, we're coming to something we're going to talk about for you. So Marc and Giulia, I would love to know, like, what are your top tips? What are the interview process thoughts and ideas? You know, how are you thinking, you know, how do you help prep people for that situational interview question that comes up? You know, what are the things that like stand out for you guys that this is sort of what you try and help your candidates work through in this process?
I certainly think knowing from our side, it's very, very important that, as I mentioned already, we know the client and we know not just the client, but the actual person who's going to be doing the interview and that person's background and I suppose how they work. The flip side is that we would always advise our candidates to do loads of research on the individuals that they're going to be interviewing with and their background, their career pathway, and looking for common ground and looking for things that there may be discussion points around. So I think from that, you can tend to get a bit of a gauge about the type of questions that may come through. And equally so, you can apply as almost like a personal answer around it as well. I love what Irene said around sort of reverse qualification. I think you mentioned it, Carol Jean, as well, around obviously you not being concerned or worried about asking questions around the organisation when you're there as well. In fact, I used to interview a lot of people in my previous organisation. When you get to the end and you say, have you got questions? And they say, no, you've covered it all. you're like, well, I'm either the best interviewer ever because I can't have covered it all. So so go in there really, really fully prepared with questions that are not just tick box questions. They're things you really, really want to know the answer to. Things where you've looked on the website, or you've looked at the role, or you've looked at people who are working there. And you know what? Be quite bold around the questions you want to ask as well. It's really important you come away knowing all of the information that you want to do to make an informed decision as well. So I think the other thing is learning when you're doing interviews as well, particularly when it's your second or third interview or your second or third try, think about things that maybe you could have improved on last time as well, and work with your recruiter or someone else who can give you some very, very tangible advice around some of the answers you give. And it's practice, right? It is. And learn from those mistakes like anything in life. It's really, really important as well. And I think the final thing is, and it really, really genuinely does help, is where possible, and Irene mentioned it already, if you're working with an organisation that are happy to give at least a framework of the interview or the questions in advance, it can really help prep, and it can really help organisations see the best part of you as well. So yes, I think there's a lot of things here that are very transferable outside of neurodiversity and obviously just to job seekers, but I think particularly for neurodivergent applicants as well, having this structure going into the interview is really, really important as well. So, and I love the anecdote story, Irene, as well. I think it's great to have a couple in there that you can have prepared and rehearsed as well. So.
I do. I think it's, that's something that really helped me. In my 20s, I had a coach who helped me sort of curate a group of stories that I could tell, sort of my elevator pitch around that skill, because it's like, when is it? Tell me about a time you failed. I'm like, really? My first is like, I don't want to talk about that. Are you kidding? But really, number one, I think also is getting really comfortable in like owning your story and knowing that also, we put so much pressure on ourselves to do things perfectly, to not make mistakes. And in the interview process, you could just have a bad day. You might have woken up and it just went sideways from the time you stepped out of bed and you got an interview that day. And,
Absolutely.
Maybe there is no regrouping on that one. And so I think part of this conversation has to be too, it's like, it's okay if it just went to hell in a handbasket.
100%.
Yeah. Can I add a couple things too that I was thinking of as Marc was talking? I want to say too, like one of the great ways to do interview prep, and I talked about kind of like my bank of stories, which I think is one way to interview prep, is rereading questions I've been asked or questions I prepared to answer the best. But do mock interviews. You don't need a career coach to do them. You can do them with your friends, or if there's somebody in your industry. And, Carol Jean could say, hey, Irene, ask me to talk about a time when I failed. So I can ask you the question as if we're in the interview. You give me the answers if we're in the interview. And then we can kind of debrief. Where did you feel like you were really strong? What did you say that you wish you hadn't said? And all of that practice just really helps you get more confident moving into the interview. So I suggest that with everybody. And you don't need a coach. You don't need, again, you can have your kind of personal board of directors, which is friends and supporters. Listen and do that. I feel like the value of that can't be underestimated, because even if you're not asked the exact questions, you have that rehearsal of being confident. I can recover. I don't think you have to be perfect in an interview. If a company is requiring like every interview you do to be perfect, I can only think of the hell of working in that job once you get there. So, most companies, sometimes I'll go in and say, gosh, it's been a really tough week for me. I'm really excited to talk with you. But if I stumble over my words, give me a minute and I'll regroup myself. Like, I don't have a problem saying that in an interview. And if they had a problem with it, I would think twice about that company. The other thing is, as I'm kind of leading into, in the interview, it's totally fine to partner with your interviewer and ask a clarifying question. So like, you want me to talk about a time that failed? Do you want me to talk about a time where I failed and learned something in the aftermath? Or do you want me to talk about what I did to recover so that we could still have a positive outcome? You in your own mind will know, I have 5 different stories of times I failed, each with a different, moral or highlighting a different skill set. Ask your interviewer in the interview, what would you like me to focus on? And then give them as close as you can to what they want. Because ideally, at some point they're going to go into a debrief and say, yeah, I talked with Carol Jean. I asked the question about failure. She did a really great job of honing in on the kind of, skill sets we were looking for in terms of dealing with failure. And the story she told was really strong about how she, dusted herself off and undid the damage and blah, blah, blah. So feel free to consider that a conversation. You don't have to save all your questions till the end. You can really ask, why are you, a politer version of why are you asking me this question? What's your goal with this question? What do you need to know from this question? And that way you're not making an assumption. Oh, they want to understand, have I ever failed in my life? No, that might not be what they want to know at all. They might want to understand how resilient are you that you can bounce right back. But if you give the answer that doesn't hit their point, then they don't have the info they're looking for.
And then they're like, oh, this person isn't hitting the marks for what we're looking for. And I think, oh my gosh, Irene, you bring up such a good point. And I know Marc and Giulia probably have some thoughts on this because that's how Marc taking notes while you were talking. So I love how this conversation's going back and forth. One of the things is like, as a neurodivergent person, I get nervous. Number one, I am an auditory processor. So it's really helpful for me to ask questions or to talk out. Like I love sort of practicing with a friend. Now, before I would never have done that because I didn't know how to get comfortable with me to share that part because that felt very vulnerable. So I think, sometimes we got to also ask, well, what are some barriers that I have internally that are keeping me from really being able to do the things that I know are going to be helpful to me? So it's kind of like I had to work through, well, why am I scared to even tell one of my friends what my story is about? How do I answer the question about, tell me about a time you failed? And it's like, well, what were the things internally that were blocking that? And then I think on the other side, we feel like there's this unwritten some things we on board of like, if somebody asks me a question, I immediately have to have an answer. Like, and if I don't immediately have an answer, then I'm screwing up. And then you get nervous and then this builds up in your body. And then your brain is not in your prefrontal cortex where you're thinking critically and pulling all those resources from the stories that you put together in your list bank. And it's number one, take a breath. Like your recruiter is not looking for rapid fire conversation. Like, here's the question, give me the answer. Here's the question, give me the answer. That's not the rhythm of this. And sometimes if it feels a little fast for you, this is one of the things that I sort of learned from being on the interviewer and interviewee side of the table is take a breath. Because, we're all human. So is the person that's interviewing you. Maybe they've had a bad day and maybe they'll appreciate the fact that you maybe slow the pace down a little bit, because you can, in a conversation, speed up or slow down the pace to kind of meet the need in that. So I love that you brought these up. Irene, these are so good.
And I think part of it also is really acknowledging for yourself, like there is shame associated with being disabled in the way that a lot of folks in society view it. There is stigma around it. And, I feel like coming to terms with that, I don't agree with that. I don't promote that, but I know that exists. And so that helps me take it easier on myself and then also coach my clients. If you're with somebody and you're like, hey, I could really use these adjustments. And they're like, what? You want the questions in advance? That's cheating, or whatever, whatever their response is, that's really reflective of them and where they're at in their understanding. But you don't have to take that on. You can know people feel uncomfortable around disability, that they don't want to bring it up, that they stigmatize people with disability without taking on that burden. But I think it's better to kind of, acknowledge that to yourself. Yeah, I'm scared to say I need accommodations because I'm worried they're going to think I can't do the job if I need closed captions or if I need the questions an hour in advance. And again, I would say a mature workplace understands that. I've recruited it, for example, at Facebook, and they do really well with the accommodations process. And I don't just say that as an internal person. As a recruiter, I always check in with my candidates. I build trust with them through the process. And then I'll say, please tell me, I'd love your feedback on your call with so-and-so. How did it go? You asked for accommodations. Did those work out for you? And that way I can give feedback into my org. I think some of the listeners today They may not consider themselves neurodiverse. They may not be hiring managers. They may just want to be allies, either to their friends or acquaintances or in the workplace. And one way that anybody can do this is by really standing up and saying, hey, we need an accommodations policy. We need this, we need that. And really speaking up for folks, because that helps people who are stigmatized say, oh, wow, somebody else is talking about this and helping carry that flag with me. I'm not alone in the workplace. I'm not the only neurodivergent person in this workplace who wants to get a different, setup. And again, a quiet room in a workplace helps neurodivergent people. It also helps people who are having a tough day. It also helps people who need to pray. It also helps nursing mothers. So all of these things, they really create a more humane environment for all of us, where we're less likely to have a meltdown in the workplace. And I'm not just talking about an autistic meltdown, because we're being cared for as human beings in the workplace and not just treated like widgets, which I think, a lot of the marketing of neurodiversity in the workplace is like, oh, we can hyper-focus. Oh, we can do this, but we're not robots. My productivity is more than how much work I'm able to produce in a given amount of time. And I want to be treated like a living, thinking, feeling human being that sometimes will need to slow down or a quiet space.
Yes. And you just led us perfectly into our last topic of conversation in this and that is from the opposite side of the table, not the interviewee, but the interviewer and the company side of things. Marc and Giulia, I'd love for you guys to kind of start us off on this, because you are doing something that I really love. You're building relationships with companies. You're building relationships with the people who are interviewing your talent pool. And you're really looking for sharing information, getting information. So from that perspective, in what you've been doing in Diversita, what do you see, or what are some of the suggestions? What are some of the best practices and tips that you have for companies, recruiters, and hiring managers who are looking to hire and really do value and want to support within the framework of how their company operates day to day and their culture in neurodiversity? What are those things for you? What are the things that come up that you see that you're really like, this needs some improvement? This is happening really well. You guys are doing a great job. Here are sort of big top 5 things. What are those?
I've spoken to, I think probably since April, probably about 100 organisations in the UK for one reason or another. And I think they tend to fall into various camps at the moment in terms of their neurodiversity journey. But I think in terms of tips, I think the biggest one for me so far is to start, right? As in, let's start your journey without it being in a place of fear, right? Because one of the key things we see at the moment with particularly talent acquisition teams or recruiters, I think as you may call them, organisations, there's a sense of fear because they are scared that they need to rip up their organisation front to back in terms of changing everything strategically and holistically to make a start, right? And I think this is the key thing that we're trying to communicate at the moment, that you can have situational change and you can make small steps and you can cause yourself nice problems that you need to solve as you go along as well. So I think for the most part, it's starting if you're not there. I think the other part of the moment then that really stands out with organisations is to make sure that everyone, particularly people leaders, have a conversational understanding around neurodiversity. Again, with large enterprise size organisations, so 1,000 people plus, we tend to find there's always a head of DEI, there's some great business leaders really driving this from a very, very high strategic level, but it doesn't filter down to day-to-day decision makers and more importantly, day-to-day management of individuals as well. So the key advice we give to people at the moment is start conversational understanding around neurodiversity. And the third most important part is start to individualize your recruitment process where you can, right? If I look at some of the large investment banks that I've recruited for, the layers in the process, and I'm not just talking about interview, I'm talking about the CV review process, where it would go to a recruiter, it would then go to potentially a business manager, then a few members of the team. The layers this is going through is really, really challenging. So there's never really an opportunity to have an individual conversation around the candidate. And you mentioned, Carol Jean, right at the start around having a diverse CV, but you can still add value. That may come better from a conversation supplemented by a resume, right? And I think at the moment, organizations at least need to have a silo, I believe, for neurodivergent applicants where they can have an individual conversation. My last point is that there's one really, really great organization we're working with at the moment. And I think just to I suppose, compound this point at the moment, we work with 6 different organizations, but we could work with 10 times that at the moment, but organizations just aren't ready, right? So I met with an organization the other day, and they started interviewing some of our candidates now, and they've set up a process where myself has a conversation with the hiring manager the day before the candidate goes in as well. So the recruiter has facilitated that, and we can talk about the candidate in a very, very individual way. We can talk about if it's a dyslexic candidate and there may be a slight delay in terms of information processing, it's fine. And we can set a really good foundation of understanding there as well. So I think it's probably been covered on there already, but organizations don't need to do that much to start this as well. They really don't. They really don't. There's going to be some knock-on effect. There's going to be some things they need to change. There's going to be longer-term strategies and longer-term movement around this, but it's really, really important that people start. They really, really do. And like I say, create yourself some challenges, create a problem where, okay, we've got a candidate who started there. How do we support them? How do we support them through review processes? How do we support some of the that's brilliant. The fact is that you've made it happen and you've moved the action forward as well. So yeah, hopefully that answers it.
Oh, yes, it sure did. And you made so many wonderful points. And, the NeuroDrive team, the whole reason that I created this division of Mind Your Autistic Brain was because we saw companies getting some pretty tough and wrong, in our opinion. I mean, and I'm not about a right or wrong thing. Let's put it this way, some less beneficial information. And that was, okay, we've got a 60 plus page playbook and we need to basically scrap everything that you've done. We need to create a big committee that's going to take about a year to really dive in. And then we're not even going to implement stuff for, at least 18 months to 2 years. And this is what you have to do to have a neurodiversity program. And I was just like, wow, that is so complicated. And my ADHD autistic brain just went like, nope, it is so much easier than that. And you are making a mountain out of a molehill.
100%.
Because number one, if you have 1,000 employees, on average, 300 of those employees are neurodistinct. They are autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, dyspraxic, bipolar. And in all of those 300, some may know that they are, some may not know that they are, but they're already there, folks. Mm-hmm. And, to kind of highlight Marc's point, part of what we do with the NeuroDrive Blueprint is we come in and we say, let's take a look at what you're doing, because you're probably doing some things really well. And let's just look at, where do we start? Like, where's the big pain point? Where's the bottleneck? Where's the thing that's going to really open things up for you? But you got to start with the foundation of, what do you really value? Why do you want to have neurodiversity in your business? Really? What is the benefit to you? How do you value it? And then let's talk about it from a leadership standpoint. What are you as leaders value? Is this in alignment? Because there's no point in checking a box so you can put something on your website and then try and attract neurodivergent talent or support the neurodivergent talent you have. Let's look at who you already have. Let's start with what you already have and what exists. And it's not complicated. You start with one team. You start with one department. You start with one change that is something that's across the board super simple. And it's not hugely costly. And I love that you're talking about just get started, but it's like, let's get started with the right foundation. Let's get started with the conversation that's going to really make this either successful or not successful if you have the conversation. Because if you're not talking about, well, what do we really value? Then you're not really going to get to the heart of why do we do stuff, because we don't do things unless we value them.
Yeah. I think too, part of it is, and this is a struggle, I think, for like people of color as well. And I think there's a lot to be learned from some of the different like decolonization or liberation movements. Is there's already been a ton written, researched, discussed, people's first person narratives about what neurodiversity is like, what neurodiversity is like in the workplace. So we're not starting from zero. Like you said, there's already neurodiverse people in your workforce right now, guaranteed. If you think there are none because you see no sign of them, that's a sign that your workplace is not particularly friendly to them. And that's the place where you can start, right? Is how can we start opening that door right now? But there's tons of research and pick a book and then implement what it does. You can watch YouTube videos for free and learn. If you're a manager, you could ask the people you manage for resources if they've, been upfront about who they are, or even if they haven't. If you're like, oh, wow, I have a suspicion this person's going to know a lot about this topic. Let me see if they, hey, Irene, you're always talking about neurodiversity on your LinkedIn profile. What would be a great book I could read? Or what's a good article? Or who should I follow? Or whose YouTube channel is great? 10 minutes a day, I don't know, 10 minutes a week. It's not a big lift. And I think that's why, as a job seeker, if a company's really not making more than an effort, or as Carol Jean put it, like a cosmetic effort, meaning it's on their website, but not a lot to back it up, you could think twice about working there. Do I want to invest my career in a place where I may be looking for a new job within 6 months because they won't let me have flexible hours, which I need because, I have trouble sleeping sometimes. And that's part of my autism.
One of the things that I talk about, and I did a section on this at IIL for a conference that they hosted back in March. And I was talking about what's your employment brand as a company. You have something, not just your company brand, you have an employment brand. And prospective employees, the talent that you're seeking, and you're saying, we want the best of the best. We want people with these sparks and this ingenuity. And we know the benefits of a diverse and inclusive culture. But what's happening is you think it's just from the landing page on your website. And really your employment brand comes from the people you employ already and the customers or the people that your business interacts with. That's really where your employment brand comes from. So really one of the best places to start kind of doing a temperature check, a culture check, is to look at and start asking in a really supportive, psychologically safe way. Sometimes it's just about maybe you get out there on your personal account and you go look and see and do a Google search of what are people saying about my company? What is it like to work for us? How are people talking about us when we're not watching, when we're not listening? What are the conversations that are happening? Because I assure you, they are out there. And those conversations are what really drive the quality of talent you get in applications. Because I'm going to always sit outside of a company, or I'm going to digitally figure out what the outside door of their company is, even in a digital world. And I'm going to figure out who's going in and out. What do they look like, feel like, act like, sound like when they're coming in and going out? Are they coming out at the end of the day and everybody's exhausted? And now they're complaining about, man, nothing went right today. If your Slack channels are silent, you folks, that's a good place to kind of start. If nobody's really talking, or what's being said in Slack, what kind of conversations are happening throughout the day in my team and in my company. And if you're not really paying attention to that aspect of your brand, your employment brand, you got an alignment problem. It's time to really do a check. And this, again, doesn't have to be lengthy or in depth, but I think both Marc, Giulia, and Irene really spoke to this. So guys, we are really excited that we are able to share this conversation with you today. I cannot thank our guest, our host, our co-host and speakers and presenters today on this topic, because this is a big one. This is, and I like to have conversations that are a little uncomfortable because we got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. We got to talk about the elephant in the room. And I think we talked about a lot of the elephants in the room, the pink one, the purple one, the one that stomps and sprays water everywhere. That elephant was there too. Because I think part of what this is, Marc highlighted this and Irene did too. And everybody's afraid because they don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. They don't want to, present something that it isn't true, but maybe it comes out wrong. Hey, we had a bad day. And I think that part of creating a place of conversation is that, I have to be willing to be a little uncomfortable to have the conversations that need to happen, because I want companies to be comfortable and not be afraid and actually have some skills and resources so that they feel more confident about hiring and creating cultures and spaces for all varieties and neurotypes, for every person, because really and truly, the research shows that companies who are inclusive, diverse in all ways, especially in economic downturns and recessions, fare better than those who are not. And right now, folks, we are just on the cusp of it. So this is an excellent time if you are a business, if you're an employer, to really do a deep dive. And if you need a NeuroDrive blueprint and an assessment on that, give me a call. Hit me up in the DM. Contact Irene, contact Marc and Giulia. Let us help you. You can ask me anything. I'm not going to get offended and I'm not going to get upset. And I will ask any scary question you have, because that's part of the service. And I think everybody that's here today in this room, Marc and Giulia, they're willing to, please ask them anything. They're willing to answer those uncomfortable, tough questions. And I know Irene is, she's so good at this. Irene is one of the absolute best. She really is. And she has amazing insights and always comes, Irene, you really do. You always come with your game, girl. You got game. You really do. You got insights. You have strategies. You are just, you're genius. And I love your zone of genius. Marc and Giulia, you are doing amazing things in the world. And I love what you do in your zone of genius. We all have a lane, and guys, we love driving in it, and we want to bring you in and let you ride in the bus with us. So come join us. Thank you so much for being here today. Guys, I want to give you an opportunity. Marc and Giulia, do you have one thing you want to say that anybody listening today, like, this is the one thing I want you to take away?
Marc?
I think that the key thing for me, particularly for the candidate market and applicants, is you should be optimistic, right? I think there's definitely so much more awareness and so much more appetite from organisations now around subjects as well. So, and I do think Irene mentioned as well that more organisations are basing their qualification process around skills as opposed to subjective requirements or anything like that. So there's definitely, I would say, be optimistic around the future, around neurodiversity in the workplace as well. I genuinely do. So yeah, that'd be my parting comment, really. Just be optimistic.
Irene, to you.
I would say that, a lot of conversation has been made for like the business case for diversity or the superpowers of neurodiverse people. And, I do think neurodiverse people add things to the workplace that neurotypical people, they have different strengths. But I also want to say workplaces should be equitable because it's the right thing to do, not because it's a business case, not because it increases your profit margin. Equity is a goal that's valuable in and of itself. There are plenty of average neurotypical people who work in jobs. You do not need to have a superpower to be employable. And I want to say that because I feel like for neurodiversity, there's always this, what's your superpower? Or how are you going to, outperform everybody else? There's an article I posted recently on LinkedIn that was titled "Autism Doesn't Hold People Back at Work, Discrimination Does." And so I really want to trouble this idea of the superpower and hiring neurodiverse people for that. Eric Garcia's recent book was titled "We're Not Broken," and we're not. We don't need fixing. We need a space made for us. We are humans as well in the workplace. And there's lots of space made for folks with privilege in the workplace already. We just accept that as normal, but that's an accommodation for them. So there's room to accommodate everybody is my, kind of basic underlying tenet there.
Ah, I love that. And that, equity goes back to like values. What are we really valuing? And I think number one, I love Eric Garcia. He's absolutely, I am a huge fan. He knows it. I've talked to him, I've done some stuff with him, and he is fantastic. And I was like, one of these days, Eric, I'm gonna like cut into your schedule and you're getting on this show. He's such a cool guy. And if you have not yet read We Are Not Broken, you need to go check it out. It is fantastic. I got an early copy and I was so thrilled to be able to get that and be asked to review it. So I highly suggest that one as well, along with Irene's suggestion. So thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, if you're watching the replay for this and you're like, wow, that was just like a major aha moment. I'm a job seeker or I'm looking to change positions. And here's one of the big important parts of this. And this is part of what NeuroDrive does is we're not looking at just entry level. We're looking at mid-level. We're looking at managers. We're looking at the C-suite. We actually have an executive leadership coaching program for neurodivergent talent who is in that place. Because one of the questions that we asked this month was, have you ever had any of these things come up when you're looking for a promotion? And what are the things that have happened that have been a barrier for you getting a promotion as a neurodivergent person? And guys, they're out there. And the problem is we're not talking about the problem. We're not talking about the systems and the structures that are set up. So there's resources, there are places to go. And we hope that this has been insightful for you. Please share your insights, your ahas, and your questions down in the chat. And we will make sure we check those and we will be replying to you. And hey, you might even be sparking the next big conversation. Thanks so much for being here, guys. Bye-bye. Okay.